Montana Territory, 1883. By sundown, Nell Shaw could lose the ferry, the house behind it, and the only crossing keeping 3 cattle outfits from freezing on the wrong side of Cedar Fork. Inside the Shaw ferry house, rain hammered the roof, while Rafe Pike tipped a glass of whiskey over the head of a gray-haired stranger. The room laughed, because men in Cedar Fork had learned that fear was cheaper than courage. Clay Mercer did not move. Whiskey ran from the brim of his hat, down his cheek, and into the coffee cooling between his hands. Nell stood behind the counter, with a rag clenched in one fist. Ben Croft watched Rafe's gun hand. Rafe leaned closer. "You know who controls this river?" Clay lifted his eyes. "The river, last I checked." The laughter died first at the far tables, then near the stove. Rafe smiled, but the smile no longer reached his eyes. "By tomorrow, that ferry belongs to me." Nell stepped from behind the counter. "You'll own nothing of mine." Her voice was steady. Her knuckles were not. Outside, the river struck the pilings hard enough to shake dust from the rafters. The main cable had already been cut once. One man was dead. Another failure would take the ferry, the cattle waiting upriver, and every small ranch depending on that final autumn sail. Rafe's hand dropped toward his revolver. Clay's hands were still flat on the table. Then, Rafe's first gun hit the floor. His second, hidden behind his belt, followed a heartbeat later. No shot was fired. Clay had not even drawn his own weapon. For the first time that evening, Rafe looked afraid. Nell saw it. So did Ben. Clay pushed the empty whiskey glass aside and spoke quietly enough that the room had to lean toward him. "Mercer Ranch, 8 years ago." The color left Rafe's face. Before anyone could ask what had happened there, a sharp metallic crack split the rain outside. Ben turned toward the river. The ferry cable groaned again, lower this time, like iron being pulled apart beneath deep water. Then the bell at the landing rang once. No one was standing near it. 3 days earlier, Clay Mercer rode into Cedar Fork beneath a sky the color of old iron. Rain had softened the road into black mud, and the river below the settlement moved high and brown between the cedar banks. Clay intended to buy a hot meal, ask whether Rafe Pike had passed through, and be gone before darkness. He had spent 8 years learning not to remain anywhere long enough for questions. Then he saw Nell Shaw standing alone on the ferry landing. She was braced against the hand winch, boots sliding on wet planks as the current dragged the empty ferry downstream. A bandage showed beneath one sleeve. Near the pilings, Ben Croft sat with his injured leg stretched before him, shouting instructions he could no longer carry out himself. "Release the lower catch," Clay called. Nell did not look at him. "Release it now and she'll turn broadside." The ferry cable groaned above the water. Clay tied his horse to the rail and stepped onto the landing. "Then give me the crank." "I didn't ask for help." "No," he said, gripping the iron handle beside her. "The river did." They worked without another word. Nell watched the current and called each turn. Clay leaned his weight into the winch until the gears bit, and the ferry's bow slowly came back toward shore. Neither tried to do the other's work. When the hull finally struck the landing, Nell secured the chain herself. Only then did she study the stranger beside her. Soaked coat, scarred hands, a revolver worn low, but untouched. Inside the ferry house, she set coffee before him and explained what Cedar Fork stood to lose. The last cattle drive of the season was 3 days away. If the crossing failed, several small ranches would miss the final market before winter. One rider had already drowned during the previous accident, and Rafe Pike was using the death to call her reckless. Clay said it was none of his concern, but before leaving the landing, he crouched beside the main cable. Several strands had been worn thin in one clean section. not rusted, not snapped by strain, filed. Clay ran his thumb over the bright metal. Someone had tried to make the river look guilty, and whoever had done it knew exactly when the ferry would be carrying men. By dusk, the rain had thickened into a hard, slanting sheet. Clay should have been riding north. Instead, he stood ankle-deep in river water beside Nell Shaw, hauling the empty ferry toward the landing, while Ben Croft worked the hand winch with one good arm. The damaged section of cable had to be replaced before morning. If they left it under strain through the night, the current could tear the ferry loose and send it downstream. Nell looped a safety line around her waist and stepped onto the wet platform. "Keep the bow facing upstream," she told Clay. "If it turns, don't fight the river. Let it spend itself first." Clay nodded once. He knew rope. He knew frightened cattle, broken harness, and the terrible weight of something large, deciding it no longer wished to be controlled. But the river moved differently. Without warning, the upper anchor pin jumped free. The ferry swung sideways. The line around Nell's waist snapped tight and dragged her across the planks. Her boot struck the railing. One leg went over the edge. Clay wrapped the hauling rope twice around a cedar post and leaned back with his full weight. The wet hemp burned through his glove. "Cut the lower line!" he shouted. Nell pulled her knife, but the safety rope had twisted around her ankle. Ben tried to rise and collapsed against the winch. Nell did not call for help. She bent against the pull, sawed through the trapped line, and rolled back onto the platform as the ferry lurched toward the rocks. "3 turns left," she gasped. Clay forced the crank around while she watched the current and counted. Together, they brought the bow back into line. When the ferry finally struck the landing, neither spoke for several seconds. Inside, Nell cleaned the rope burn across Clay's palm and closed it with 3 careful stitches. "You plan to leave before dark," she said. "I did." "What changed?" Clay looked toward the black window. "Someone wants this crossing to fail." At dawn, Ben found the loosened anchor pin beneath the landing. Fresh tool marks shone around its head. Beyond the cedar trees, a rider was already disappearing into the rain. Then hoofbeats sounded from the southern road. Rafe Pike was coming back, and he was not riding alone. Rafe Pike reached Shaw Ferry House shortly after sunrise, with 6 riders and 3 cattle owners behind him. He came without haste. Men who believed the outcome was settled rarely hurried. Nell met them in the muddy yard. River water still darkened the hem of her skirt. Clay stood near the landing, his bandaged hand resting at his side. Rafe looked past him. "Another night like this," he said, "and somebody else dies on your ferry." Nell did not step aside. "A man died because your buyers pushed a crossing after I closed the landing." One cattle owner lowered his eyes. Rafe smiled. "The widow's blaming her customers now." "I'm not a widow," Nell said, "and you were never my customer." The smile thinned. Rafe unfolded an offer to purchase the ferry, boarding house, and landing rights for less than half their value. In return, he promised to reopen the crossing before the last herds arrived. If Nell refused, he would tell every rancher south of Cedar Fork that she was responsible for the drowned rider and every animal lost to winter. It was not law. It was hunger dressed in clean words. "You have until tomorrow at sundown," Rafe said. Clay watched him laugh softly with the cattleman. The sound reached through 8 years of distance, a burning roof, a horse screaming in smoke, a young rider thrown near the corral, one eyebrow split against a fence post, the same pale scar now cut through Rafe's brow. Clay's hand moved an inch toward his coat before he stopped it. Nell noticed. After the riders left, she found Clay in the storage room replacing the damaged anchor pin. His coat lay across a barrel. A folded strip of paper had slipped from the inner pocket. 6 names were written in faded pencil. 5 had been crossed out. Rafe Pike remained. Nell held the paper when Clay turned. "You didn't come here because of the ferry." "No, you came to kill him." Clay did not answer quickly enough. Nell placed the list on the barrel. "You can sleep in the shed tonight," she said. "Tomorrow, you help me keep this crossing open, or you ride somewhere else to settle your debt." From beyond the northern ridge came the low sound of cattle bells. The final herds were closer than anyone expected. By noon, the first herds had reached Cedar Fork. Cattle crowded the northern bank, restless beneath the rain, while riders argued over whether Shaw Ferry could still be trusted. Nell kept the landing closed. She would not send one animal into water she had not judged safe. Rafe Pike arrived before the argument could settle. He stepped into the ferry house carrying a glass of whiskey and the certainty of a man who believed fear had already done his work. Clay sat alone with coffee. Rafe stopped beside him. "You were told to ride on." Clay looked at the rain running down the windows. "I was told to choose." Rafe poured the whiskey over his head. The room laughed, but Nell did not. Ben watched Rafe's right hand. Clay watched the left. When Rafe reached for his revolver, Clay caught his wrist and drove the barrel toward the floor. The gun struck the boards. Rafe's other hand darted behind his belt. Clay was already there. The second weapon fell beside the first. No shot was fired. Clay pushed the empty glass away. Mercer Ranch. 8 years ago. Rafe's face lost its color. He said he had been 17. He said the older men promised only to frighten a family off disputed grazing land. He said no one told him the house would burn. Clay's voice remained low. And every year since, you chose to become the kind of man they wanted you to be. Rafe looked toward Nell, then toward the cattlemen gathering near the doorway. Ask him what happened to the other 5. Silence hardened around Clay. Rafe smiled again, weakly this time. 5 names crossed out. 5 men buried. He didn't come to save your ferry. He came to finish a list. Nell's eyes found Clay's face. He did not deny it. Then metal screamed outside. The main cable snapped. Through the window, the ferry swung broadside with a freight wagon and 2 men aboard. Nell ran before anyone else moved. Rafe was unarmed, cornered, and within Clay's reach. Clay had waited 8 years for that moment. He left Rafe standing there and followed Nell into the rain. Behind them, someone took the maintenance ledger from her office. By the time Clay reached the landing, the ferry was already turning toward the rocks. The ferry struck the first rock hard enough to throw one man beneath the wagon. Nell seized the landing rope and wrapped it around the capstan. Clay followed her onto the wet planks as the current dragged the cableless ferry downstream. "Don't pull against it," she shouted. "Give it room to turn." Clay fed rope through his injured palm while Nell watched the water. At her signal, he locked the line. The ferry swung past the deeper channel and slammed against a gravel bar. They reached the men before the wagon overturned. One crawled ashore with a broken wrist. The other could not stand, but he was alive. The freight was not. Crates split open in the water, flour whitening the brown current before vanishing downstream. When they returned to the house, Rafe was gone. So was Nell's maintenance ledger. The room that had watched Clay disarm him now avoided Clay's eyes. 5 dead men traveled faster through a crowd than any explanation. Nell laid the severed cable across a table. Fresh file marks shone beneath the broken strands. "This proves the break was made," Clay said. "It does not prove who made it." Ben sat near the stove, his injured leg stiff beneath him. For a long time, he stared at the cable. Then he spoke. 2 weeks earlier, before the rider drowned, Ben had seen Rafe beside the upstream anchor after dark. When Ben challenged him, Rafe struck him with an iron tool and warned that another accident would cost Nell more than a ferry. Ben had remained silent because Rafe controlled buyers, freight contracts, and men who needed the crossing. Nell's anger came quietly. "You let me believe I killed him." Ben lowered his head. "I was trying to keep you alive." "No," she said. "You were trying to keep me afraid." Clay understood the difference. Nell turned to him. "The ferry is stranded. The ledger is gone. Tomorrow, every rancher here must choose between Rafe's crossing and winter." Clay said he would bring the ferry back before dark. She studied him, neither forgiving nor fully trusting. "Then bring it back." He had barely reached the landing when Ben smelled smoke. Beyond the rain, flame climbed from the cable shed. Inside lay the cut section, the tools, and every spare line Cedar Fork had left. Flames ran up the cable shed before the rain could smother them. Tarred rope, dry planks, and lamp oil turned the small building into a furnace. Wind carried sparks toward the roof of Shaw Ferry House. Clay reached the yard first. For one terrible moment, he stopped. The crack of burning cedar became another roof collapsing 8 years earlier. Smoke rolled low across the ground. Somewhere inside memory, a horse screamed behind a locked corral, and a child called for a father who was 3 days away. Then it shouted from the shed. A fallen beam had trapped him beneath the shoulder. Nell ran toward the doorway. Clay caught her arm. Beyond the trees, Rafe Pike was riding hard along the southern bank. Clay could still reach a horse. He could still finish what had brought him to Cedar Fork. Nell pulled free. "Ben is alive." Those 3 words broke the past open. Clay turned away from Rafe. He wrapped his coat around his face and followed Nell into the smoke. Together, they lifted the beam enough for Ben to drag his injured leg clear. The roof groaned above them. Nell saw the flames reaching the wall shared with the boarding house. "My records," she said. "Leave them. There's a copy beneath the office floor." Clay held the beam while she crawled through the smoke. The heat blistered his wrist. A rafter fell behind her, cutting off the front room. Nell returned with a leather packet pressed beneath her dress. The porch roof collapsed as they stumbled into the rain. Half the boarding house burned before the townsmen formed a bucket line. Nell ordered them to protect the winch house and let the guest rooms go. Saving the crossing mattered more than saving her bed. Clay's saddlebag burned with the shed. When he found it, the folded list inside had become black ash. 6 names, 8 years, and the last road he had understood were gone. Ben stared across the river. On the opposite bank, lanterns moved around a mass of cattle. Rafe was gathering the herds at a gravel crossing downstream. "That ford won't hold them," Nell said. A cow lowed in the darkness. Hundreds answered. Rafe had not fled Cedar Fork. He was about to make the river kill for him again. By first light, Rafe's riders had pushed the cattle toward the gravel ford. The river looked shallow there, but Nell knew what lay beneath it. A narrow shelf, loose stones, and a drop deep enough to roll a steer beneath the animals behind it. The ferry remained stranded against the lower rocks. Its guide cable was gone. One side rail had split, and the deck tilted toward the current. "It will not carry cattle," Ben said. "It doesn't have to," Nell answered. "It only has to carry us." They needed to reach the opposite bank with the records before Rafe forced the first herd into the water. Clay's burned hand could barely close. His shoulder had swollen beneath his coat. Still, he helped Ben fasten a spare rope to the damaged ferry and run it through the shore pulley. Nell took the steering sweep. "You pull when I say," she told Clay. Not before. The current caught them immediately. The ferry spun, struck floating timber, and tore the tool chest from its lashings. Clay seized the hauling rope as it whipped across the deck. It wrapped around his injured wrist and dragged him to one knee. Nell could save the tools or save him. She cut the chest loose. Iron fittings, hammers, and dry nails vanished into the river. Clay looked at her. "You'll need those to rebuild. I need you on the rope now." Ben called each hidden rock. Nell worked the sweep between them. Clay pulled in painful lengths until blood darkened the cloth around his palm. Near midstream, the ferry dropped into the deeper channel. Clay took the leather packet from inside his coat and placed it in Nell's hand. "If one of us reaches shore, we both reach it," she said. "If one of us does." Nell tied the packet beneath her belt. "Then stop speaking like a man searching for a useful death." The words struck harder than the current. Clay braced his feet and pulled. The ferry climbed out of the channel and struck the far bank sideways. Ben fell. Nell lost the sweep, and Clay nearly followed it into the river. They reached mud alive. Above them, Rafe raised one arm. The first cattle started down the bank. A steer stumbled, disappeared to its shoulders, and turned broadside. The entire herd began to press forward. The lead steer lost its footing and swung sideways in the current. Cattle crowded behind it, horns striking flanks, hooves tearing the riverbank into mud. If the herd entered all at once, the animals in front would drown beneath the weight of those still pushing forward. Nell climbed the bank and seized the brass ferry bell from Ben. She rang it hard. The sharp, familiar sound cut through the lowing. Riders who had worked the Shaw crossing before turned toward her. "Pull the lid cattle left," she shouted. "Give them room to climb." 2 cowboys obeyed. Then a third. Rafe drew his revolver. "Keep them moving!" No one listened. Nell cut the temporary guide rope stretched across the approach. The pressure broke. The front animals turned toward open ground, and the herd began to bend away from the ford. Ben raised the severed cable for everyone to see. "I watched Pike at the upstream anchor before the first man drowned," he said. "He struck me when I challenged him." Nell opened the leather packet. The copied maintenance entries showed the cable had been inspected and sound before both failures. Rafe moved toward her. Clay stepped between them. The first shot tore through Clay's coat and grazed his ribs. He caught Rafe's wrist before a second shot. The revolver fell into the mud. Rafe reached behind his belt for the hidden gun. Clay had seen that motion before. He twisted the second weapon free and drove Rafe to his knees. The cattlemen closed around them. Rafe's power disappeared in the space between one breath and the next. Clay drew his own Colt. His hand shook. 5 graves had not returned his wife. 5 deaths had not restored his son's voice. Rafe was the last name, but the list itself was already ash. Clay opened the loading gate. One beyond 6 cartridges dropped onto the wet planks of the landing. "Killing you won't give me back my home," he said. "It will only burn what I have left." The cattleman bound Rafe for transport to the nearest territorial authorities. Nell picked up 1 cartridge from the mud. When she asked Clay where he would go after his wound healed, he looked across the river toward the blackened ferry house. He had no answer. 5 days later, the Cedar Fork River began to fall. Mud marked the walls of the winch house. The ferry rested crooked on the gravel bar, one rail broken and half its deck warped by water. Shaw Ferry House stood behind it with 3 rooms burned open to the weather. No one called it a victory. The cattle remained on the northern bank, while the riders built a safer holding pasture. 2 ranchers had lost animals. Ben's shoulder would heal, but the damage to his arm meant he might never work the heavy winch again. He placed its iron key in Nell's palm. "My hands know the river," he said. "They just may not be strong enough to hold it anymore." Nell closed his fingers around the key. "Then you teach the next hands." Clay sat on the porch while she changed the bandage around his ribs. Neither spoke about the night by the ford. His horse waited saddled beside the rail. Nell walked through the remains of the house and counted what the fire had left. The north roof needed replacing. The storage wall had to be rebuilt. New cable would have to come from the railhead. And until then, every crossing would depend on rope, judgment, and favorable water. Clay tightened the saddle cinch. Nell did not ask him to stay. She carried a hammer outside and placed it on the scorched railing. "The north roof will not hold the first snow," she said. Clay looked east, where the road climbed beyond the cedar trees. For 8 years, every road had ended with a name. Now there was only distance. He removed the saddle from his horse. Nell brought him coffee and set it beside the hammer. Then she placed the cartridge she had taken from the mud on the burned windowsill. Clay did not load it. He lifted the first new board, while Nell measured the cut. Ben watched from the landing, calling out where the old frame still carried weight. Clay could still remember his wife's face. Some mornings, he could not remember the exact sound of his son's laughter. Cedar Fork did not return either one. It gave him work that belonged to the living. The first hammer blow crossed the water, then another. Behind him, the road remained open. His horse no longer wore a saddle. "Thank you for staying with us to the end." Clay's road did not close with a gunshot, but with the sound of a hammer against new wood. And sometimes, that is what a second chance truly sounds like. Tell us in the comments whether you believe he made the right choice at Cedar Fork. If this story kept you company, please subscribe and join us for more tales of Western romance, frontier survival, hard-earned justice, and wounded people finding the courage to begin again.